This happened back when I was 16 and still living with my parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Northern California. The kind of town where people don't lock their doors during the day. Kids ride their bikes down the middle of the street. And everybody knows each other, or at least thinks they do. We had a pretty big backyard. There was a wooden fence wrapping around it, a few tall trees, and a shed in the far corner that my dad built himself. It's a kind of yard where you'd host summer barbecues, catch fireflies at night, that sort of thing. And even though it bordered a small wooded area, we never had issues with animals or trespassers. It was a Friday night. My parents were out of town visiting my aunt, and I had the house to myself for the weekend. I wasn't throwing any parties or anything like that. I was kind of a loner back then, so I just made myself a microwave dinner, played some Xbox, and watched movies until I started dozing off on the couch. It must have been around 1:30, and the morning when I woke up, the TV was still on. But the movie had ended and that creepy, low-volume menu music was looping. I sat up, stretched, and started gathering my stuff to go to bed. And that's when I noticed something weird. The back porch light was on now. That might not sound like a big deal, but I never leave that light on. It's one of those motion-activated ones, and it only ever comes on when someone or something moves. Back there, I walked over to the sliding glass door that leads to the backyard. I couldn't see much. The light was flickering a little. I think the bulb was going bad, but there was definitely movement. At first I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a stray cat. I kind of leaned toward the glass, trying to get a better look through the vertical blinds. Then I saw him. There was a man standing near our shed, not moving, just standing there, in the shadows. He wasn't holding a flashlight or looking for anything. He was just facing the house, watching, my whole body locked up. It didn't make sense. He wasn't dressed like a landscaper or a utility worker or anything. He looked disheveled, like he had been out there for a long time. Hoodie, jeans, maybe boots I couldn't see clearly enough, but I could see his head turned slowly toward the porch. That's when I dropped to the floor. I army crawled away from the door, completely out of sight. I didn't want to turn off the porch light because I was afraid any movement would let him know I was watching. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table and crawled into the downstairs bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely type. I texted my neighbor, Mr. Larson. He's this retired Marine who lives alone across the street. I told him someone was in our backyard and I was alone. He responded almost immediately. Call 911. I'll go check it out. I called the cops and told them everything. I stayed in that bathroom, crouched under the sink, just listening. Then I heard the faintest tap. It wasn't on the glass door, it was on the kitchen window. The window above the sink. Whoever this guy was, he had moved from the shed to the side of the house, and he was trying to look in. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, frozen, as he tapped again. Then, a few moments later, I heard the loud creak of the side gate opening. Not slamming opening. Slowly I heard Mr. Larson's voice outside. Hey, who the hell are you? Then some yelling. Fast. Footsteps. Something crashing into the fence. When the cops arrived, maybe 10 minutes later, they found Mr. Larson in my backyard with a baseball bat. The man had taken off through the woods behind the shed. Gone. Here's the part that really got me. When the officers searched the yard, they found a knife stuck into the side of the shed. Not like someone dropped it. It had been driven into the wood. Almost like a marker or a warning. There were also footprints barefoot. No shoes. I stayed with Mr. Larson that night. I didn't sleep. The cops never found the guy. They said maybe he was a squatter or just a drifter passing through. But he wasn't trying to steal anything. He didn't try to break in. He just stood there, watching, waiting. And to this day, I always check the backyard before I go to sleep. Every night, no matter where I am, because I don't know who he was. But I do know this. He knew I was home. Story. This happened to me when I was in college, just a couple years ago. I went to school in a small town in the Pacific Northwest. Not exactly a big city, but not some remote cabin in the woods either. It's one of those places where the fog hangs low in the morning and the rain never really stops. Cozy if you're into that kind of thing. Creepy if you're alone, which I was, a lot. I was renting this tiny one-bedroom apartment just off campus. It was cheap, which meant it wasn't exactly nice, but it had big windows that looked out onto the street. And I liked how much light came in during the day. At night, though, those same windows turned into black mirrors, and I've never liked the feeling of being watched. The building only had 4 units, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. I was in the bottom left one. There was an old woman who lived above me, and some guy I never really saw in the apartment next to hers. I mostly kept to myself. The incident happened on a Thursday night during midterms. I'd been up late studying. It was almost 2 a.m., and I had just made myself a cup of tea to wind down when I heard a knock on my window. Not the door, the window. At first I thought I imagined it. My building sat a few feet back from the sidewalk, and there was a little garden bed between the walkway and my window. Not exactly a place where people would just casually walk up. Then I heard it again. A soft, deliberate knock. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The kitchen light was still on, which meant I was probably visible from outside. The blinds were closed, but they were those cheap plastic vertical ones that never really cover the window completely. Didn't move. Just stood there, holding my mug, staring at the blinds. Then a voice, a woman's voice, soft, calm. Way too calm, she said. "I know you're in there." My blood went cold. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stood, perfectly still, waiting. Then she said it again, a little closer this time. "Please, let me in. I just want to talk to you." At this point, I was thinking maybe it was a neighbor, someone drunk or confused, but it didn't sound like my upstairs neighbor. It didn't even sound like someone I'd ever met before. Backed away slowly, trying not to make noise, and grabbed my phone off the counter. I didn't call 911 right away. Just pulled up the camera and gently slid one of the blinds open. And I swear to God, there was a woman standing inches from the glass. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open. She was smiling, but not in a friendly way. It was this unsettling, tight-lipped grin, like she was trying really hard to seem normal and failing miserably. Her hair was dark and stringy, soaked from the rain. She was wearing what looked like a white NIGHT-GOWN barefoot, and she was just staring into my apartment, not moving, just smiling. I ducked back and ran to the bedroom, locked the door, and finally called the police while I was on the phone. I could still hear her tapping slowly, methodically on the window. Tap, tap, tap. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and keep the door locked. She stayed on the line with me while the officers were dispatched. Then I heard it. A second knock. But not on the window this time, on the back door. I didn't even know how she got back there. There was a wooden fence around the yard, and the gate was always locked. But somehow she'd gotten back there. Now she was knocking again, calmly, and that same voice even softer now. "I can see you hiding. Don't be afraid." I nearly dropped the phone. I whispered what was happening to the dispatcher, and she told me the officers were only a couple blocks away. Told me not to engage, then dashed silence. No more knocks, no more voice. Nothing. A few minutes later, I heard the police knock at the front door and call my name. I cautiously opened up and let them in. Must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because one of them kept asking me to sit down and breathe. They searched the property. The woman was gone. But get this, there were wet footprints leading from the front window, around the side of the building, all the way to the back door. But no sign of forced entry. There's no ID, nothing, just footprints. I filed a report and showed them the blurry photo I managed to snap through the blinds. It wasn't much, just a pale face and those wide, dark eyes. Odd. But it was enough to make one of the cops mutter, "Jesus." They patrolled the area for a few nights afterward, but she was never found. The weirdest part? A few days later, I was talking to my upstairs neighbor, the older lady. She asked if I'd had any visitors that night. I asked her what she meant. She said she heard someone whispering outside her window too. But she didn't look. She thought it was a dream. Story 3. This happened about 5 years ago, in the summer before my senior year of high school. My 2 closest friends and I, Jake and Rob, decided to go camping. We lived in upstate New York, and there's no shortage of dense woods and quiet. Lakes around here are plan was to spend a weekend in a spot Jake's older brother had shown us deep in the Catskills. Far enough off the trail that we probably wouldn't see anyone else. It was supposed to be one last summer trip before college stuff started taking over. We packed light, just one tent for the three of us, sleeping bags, some food, a little stove, and a portable speaker. We got to the trailhead around noon and hiked about 2.5 hours into the forest, and veered off the trail for a bit and found this perfect little clearing surrounded by tall trees. You couldn't even see the sky unless you looked straight up. It was completely silent. It's like the kind of silence that rings in your ears. We set up the tent, got a fire going, cooked some hot dogs, and hung out until it got dark. There's something about being in the woods at night that makes you feel really small. Even with friends around, there's this pressure, like the trees are pressing in on you. But we were joking around, telling ghost stories, doing dumb stuff like throwing twigs at each other when one of us wasn't looking. Just normal camping vibes. It was probably around 1 a.m. when things started to feel off. We'd turned off the speaker, the fire was dying down. The only sound was crickets and the occasional branch cracking way off in the distance. I was half asleep in my sleeping bag when I heard what sounded like footsteps outside the tent, not animals rustling in the brush. Footsteps, deliberate, measured, like someone walking slowly through leaves and sticks, trying not to be heard, but failing just enough. I whispered to Jake, who was closest to the tent wall. "Do you hear that?" He said, "Yeah." We both sat up, and I could feel Rob turning over, too. None of us said anything else. We were just listening. The steps circled the tent once, slow. Then again. Then they stopped right outside the back of the tent. Jake whispered, "Hello?" Just one word, no answer. Just silence. Then we heard the faintest sound, like breathing. Ragged, shallow breathing just outside the nylon wall. Too faint to be wind, too irregular to be anything else. I was frozen. Every hair on my arm stood up. It felt like something was watching us through the thin fabric of the tent. Then, from right behind me, I heard this low, raspy voice whisper, "Come out." I shot forward like I'd been electrocuted. Jake screamed. Rob started fumbling with the flashlight. But his hands were shaking too bad to switch it on, and then the tent wall shifted, like someone pressed their hand or face into it from the outside. The shape wasn't right, though. It was too tall to be a person. It was too long. Like it was stretching the material in the wrong direction. We all scrambled to the far side of the tent, away from where it was pushing in. Jake finally got the flashlight on and shined it through the tent. Wall and whatever was there wasn't there anymore. Just trees and darkness. We didn't even talk. We just bolted out of the tent barefoot, sprinting toward the trail with nothing but the flashlight. We didn't stop until we hit the main path and could see the moon again. Eventually, we slowed down and caught our breath. We didn't say a word for a long time. Just stood there in the dark, hearts racing, until Rob finally asked, "Should we go back?" Jake and I looked at each other and both shook our heads. We walked all the way back to the car and drove home that night in complete silence. We didn't even listen to music. The next morning we went back for our stuff in the daylight. Nothing was stolen, nothing was destroyed, except the tent. There were long, thin slashes down the side, where we'd heard the breathing, not made by a knife, more like claws. And we found prints, huge ones, almost human, but wrong. The proportions were off, like the toes were too long, like they'd sunk too deep into the forest floor for something, just standing still. We never figured out what it was. We still don't talk about that night. None of us camp anymore. If we ever do, we never sleep near the edge of the woods.